All right, welcome. I'm Christopher Gibson. I'm going to be your presenter tonight on the tale of men who did an extraordinary workshop earlier today on astrology and ethics. So thank you for that, Meg. Welcome to everyone in the room. We have a mixture of Stellarians here and folks from the National Council for Geocosmic Research, our new buddies here in Albuquerque. So, welcome. And then for those of you out there on the internet, we welcome you as well to our program tonight. This is called Alchemy Applied, and we're going to be talking about the Hermetic science of alchemy, its relationship to astrology, and then at the end of the class, we'll actually be applying it so that hopefully each of you is able to leave this program tonight with some piece of information about your own chart that you're able to work with and sink your teeth into over the next few months. And what else? We will have a break, probably an hour to an hour and a half through the program. As is typical for me, I oftentimes prepare more material than there's time to cover. So some of it I will go through rapidly, and the reason for that is that I've put just about everything in the notes that I've handed you. Mine look different because it's really big type. Hopefully the rest of you brought your reading glasses. Any questions so far? All right, that's going to be the organization for tonight. We're going to discuss first the history and background of alchemy, and then its relationship to astrology, and then we'll talk about how this actually can be applied to our personal charts. So, Hermetic sciences. You can see in the name the word Hermes. And Hermes Trismegistus was an allegorical figure who was identified with the Egyptian god Thoth. And it's said that he gave us all of the Hermetic sciences, and those include astrology, alchemy, and magic. Most of the Hermetic texts were kept in the library at Alexandria. Now, this was founded at the beginning of the 3rd century before the Christian era, and it served as a major center of scholarship in Hellenistic Egypt. That's basically Greek Egypt. The library at Alexandria flourished under the patronage of the Ptolemaic dynasty. There are some authors who propose that the Library of Alexandria was partially destroyed by Christians in 391 AD, when the bishop Theophilus ordered the destruction of the Serapeum, which was located close by the library. And it's also generally accepted that the Muslims sacked and destroyed the library in their conquest of 642. What the Islamic forces said when they came through Alexandria is it is either found in the Quran, and therefore we don't need it, or it's not in the Quran, and it's therefore blasphemy. However, there were some folks that decided to take away this incredible knowledge that was kept in Alexandria. So, basically, the salvaged Hermetic texts made their way into Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Islamic Empire, which stretched from portions of India in the east and all the way to the Iberian Peninsula in the west. Zane claims that the word alchemy is derived from the Arabic alchemia, meaning the unseen or the occult. The Arabic alchemist originated chemistry and the investigation of nature. They also invented two of the key instruments in the process of alchemy, the still and the retort. From them, we received words such as alchemy, alcohol, alembic, and elixir. The year 7010 AD actually began close to 800 years of the Islamic occupation of Spain. During that period of time, which is actually known as the Golden Age in Spain, Christian, Muslim, and Jew lived side by side until 1492, when the Jews and Moors were expulsed from Spain. You were given the option of convert or leave. So this started the huge diaspora. Those who stayed behind became conversos to the new faith of Christianity, and some actually survived. This is Islamic Spain. During the time of the Islamic occupation, incredible advances were made in astrology and alchemy. And it is from Spain that alchemy entered into the rest of Europe. So alchemy has been referred to as the yoga of the West. And this isn't yoga in terms of, asanas or hatha yoga postures, but yoga in terms of being a spiritual science. Now, the language of alchemy was actually derived from another symbol set, and that is the symbols of astrology. As spiritual and a philosophical discipline, alchemy studies the natural world. And the practice of alchemy impacted chemistry, metallurgy, physics, medicine, and astronomy. Now, alchemy was both an observational understanding of the workings of the natural world, as well as a way of encoding in profoundly symbolic form the inner workings of the soul, as taught in Hermetic, Rosicrucian, and Kabbalistic systems. The alchemists sought to protect their discoveries from the profane, as in their day, freedom of speech and freedom of religion was not protected. The concepts were hidden in symbolic language, and astrology is the alphabet of alchemy. It gives us the key to understanding the process and what they were talking about. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, a thing on earth is ruled by a sign or planet, comes into place in the study of alchemy. Zane says in the book Spiritual Alchemy, astrology and alchemy arrived in Europe together. A language that was applicable to one was likewise applicable to the other. Astrology teaches that everything on earth has its correspondence in the sky, and everything in the sky has its correspondence on earth. This is the key to alchemical synonyms. Highly recommend you have that book. Now, there are a lot of famous alchemists. Among them, there we have Albert the Great, Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, St. Thomas Aquinas, Cornelius Agrippa, Paracelsus, Parmigianino, Tycho Brahe, and Sir Isaac Newton. I'm sure there were some girls too, but, you know, they've sort of been excluded from history. Maybe they wrote under the male names. Who knows? So, what was the alchemist's goal? It was to transmute base metals into gold, to discover the elixir of life, to discover the philosopher's stone, and to accomplish the great work. What the heck is that? Let's talk about transmutation. And this is the process of turning base metals into gold. For some, this was the concept of physical gold. These guys usually got themselves into trouble in European courts. I think one of them, Edward Kelly, even had his ears removed while at the court in Prague. Apparently he wasn't producing the gold he had promised. For spiritual alchemists, this was the essence of spirit, or the creation of the spiritual body. In this system, the metals of alchemy represent planetary energies. I'm going to read a very long quote. This is about the reverberatory furnace. And again, in spiritual alchemy, Zane says, the material alchemist works with common materials, such as copper, lead, tin, and iron, in the endeavor to change them into a metal more valuable. The mental alchemist follows similar principles, but the elements with which he works are his thoughts. He seeks to flux them, one against the other, reduce them in the astral light, and recombine them in a mental gold that will attract to him ability, wealth, power, and success. The spiritual alchemist goes a step further. In fact, he takes the highest step possible to embodied man. He uses as his metals the various experiences of life. If some are not at hand that are necessary for this transmutation, he seeks them out. He purifies them, fluxes them in proper proportion, dissolves them in the spiritual light by the aid of a reverberatory furnace, and if the resultant transmutation is successful, he comes into possession of a golden chariot in which his soul may wing its heavenly flight through boundless time and eternity. That's also from spiritual alchemy. Just as the heat of the furnace causes the molecules of the metal to move more rapidly, we must all raise our vibratory rates in order to create a spiritual body. All of our life experiences, represented by the metals of alchemy, provide us with the opportunity to raise our vibratory rate. So what we're going to talk about now is what the metals of alchemy are. The heaviest of the metals is Saturn, corresponds to alchemical lead. Bright and shiny tin to optimistic Jupiter. Iron, weapons, or tools is Mars. Pliable copper, used in alloys, Venus. Quicksilver, or Mercury, corresponds to the planet of the same name. Silver belongs to the moon. And the gold, sought so much by the alchemist, is represented by the sun. We're going to talk about each of those. One of the things that takes place in alchemy is the process, what's described as separating dross. Does anyone know what dross is? I'm seeing heads bob, like little chihuahuas in the back of cars. Do you want to share that with us?
It's the stuff that's not pure.
The impurities found when you go to smelt metal of any kind. So the dross in life represents those portions of our experiences that may be impure or tainted in some way that actually impede our spiritual progress. But let's talk about these guys. There are, other than the 7 planets of ancient astrology, contemporary astrologers also work with what are called the upper octaves. And then there are other things that astrologers work with as well. In the Hermetic system, Uranus is considered the upper octave of Mercury. Just as Mercury is intelligence, Uranus represents that lifted to the higher level of inspiration and intuition. Neptune is considered to be the higher octave of Venus. Venus is the planet of love. Neptune is the planet of brotherly love, or feeling a connectedness to all of life. And Pluto is considered to be the upper octave of the moon in the Hermetic system. The moon governs one's relationship to family and domesticity. Pluto expresses that outward to embrace community as a whole, the larger group. All right, astrological gold corresponds to the sun. Welcome. In the soul, the sun corresponds to what are described as the power urges. Of which we could see the best trait as being rulership. Someone with a positive sun, we know as astrologers, has great leadership ability. They're able to come in, sense the needs of others, and to direct them according to their needs. What's the opposite of that?
Apathy?
Actually, dictativeness. A dictator is somebody who tries to coerce the group to function according to their wishes. So we know that the dross, or the negative qualities of alchemical gold, is through personality traits that are derived from the dictative nature or the power-hungry nature of the sun. Now, the sun in astrology is a neutral planet. So what we know is the relative harmony or discord of the sun is determined by either the aspects received from other planets, the sign in which it falls, which comes under the category of essential dignities, and also the planets it's engaged in aspect to. We know that Mars and Saturn at discord, and Venus and Jupiter at harmony. But the Sun itself is neutral. What about the area of your chart, the house in which the Sun falls? Welcome.
So sorry to be late.
Hi, Jessica. Come in and your chart is floating around here somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a seat right up front if you want to take
Oh,
that.
to the front row, Thursday night. Apologies to everybody.
Where the Sun falls in our chart, this is the area of life in which we tend to have the opportunities to attract an honor, recognition, express our authority, and usually it's an area of our life where we have some pride. So this is always a key area to search out in an astrological chart. The ores of gold correspond to when we have experiences with power, authority, where we might attract in prestige, experiences of status, self-esteem is one of the positive ores of gold, as is pride. One thing we know about persons in whose chart the Sun is a dominant influence, they like to be in control. The ores of gold find expression through self-esteem, power, and authority. Their tendency is to function with confidence and self-assurance. Gold attracts honor, recognition, and the admiration of others. Respect of self and others is a natural expression of gold. Now, gold itself can also have dross, the impurities that have to be burnt off of the metal in order to make it pure. So therefore, the personality traits that we associate with the dross of gold are arrogance, vanity, self-importance, when we are domineering, officious, bossy, authoritarian, tyrannical, despotic, dictatorial, superiority complex, or the opposite of that, an inferiority complex can also be an expression of the dross of gold. Grandiosity, pretentiousness, pompousness, and just being darn showy can be qualities of the dross of gold. We've all met people like this. And or we've all been this person at some point. Now, the pure metal of gold expresses through the qualities of leadership, positive self-esteem, self-respect, and therefore what comes with that is respect of others. Etiquette, something sadly missing from our culture these days. Honor, authority, pride in one's ability, and after pride comes humility. Modesty, self-control, and someone who is noble or dignified in their character. I used Jimmy Carter as an example of someone who has positive gold. This is somebody who held a position of power at one time, but we don't think of him as a proud or showy person, even though he's holding a medal here. He's actually somebody who goes around the world and uses his power for the benefit of others. It's not used for any type of self-aggrandizement. And he works with projects such as Habitat for Humanity.
Does he have bonds?
I don't know. I didn't pick him for that reason. I just picked him because he represented positive gold. He represents the pure ore of gold for me. Now, on to astrological silver. And we're going to go through each of the metals first And then we're going to talk about the theory of how alchemy is actually applied. But that way we're at least on the same page with what the metals represent. And keep in mind, this is a archetypal language or a symbolic language. The ores of silver correspond to the moon, which we see the best trait of the moon as being adaptable. This is pretty important if you think of the survival of life itself. Basically, the lesson we learned from Darwin is that those organisms that succeed into future generations are the organisms that were able to best adapt to their environment and to an ever-changing environment. So the traits of the moon are extremely important factors in our soul. Now, the negative traits of the moon have to do with moodiness. Have you ever known anyone like that? Again, some of us have been that way. Like the sun, the moon is considered a luminary and is a neutral planet, not having any innate harmony or discord. The sun and moon, however, have greater power than the other planets that we use in astrology. As luminaries, we give them slightly more weight. Therefore, in Hermetic astrology, when we calculate aspects, aspects involving the sun or moon are given a wider orb in our calculations. Now, think about where the moon falls in your chart, because this particular area of your chart, which we call a house, is subject to fluctuation, to moods. It is also where you receive your intuitive impressions. This is where your silver is. The alchemical ores of silver express as sensitivity, being emotional, domestic, nurturing, caring, intuitive, and impressionable. These are ores of silver. The downside to this is the moon also has a proclivity towards being passive. The light goes out. Oh, never mind, I'll sit here in the dark. Moody, fluctuating, and fickle. The ores of silver seek to express through nesting and nurturing. They are easily corrupted through passivity, hypersensitivity, and moodiness. They tend to make an individual sensitive, caring, intuitive, impressionable, emotional, and paternal/maternal, as well as moody. Have we heard that word before? Mm-hmm. Now, on to the dross. Oh, there's that word again. Does anyone have fluctuating moods?
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I take medication.
Oh, we have a couple of wits in this class. One thing I remember from my childhood is when company was coming over, guess what we had to do?
Clean.
We had to polish the silver before company came. Why? Silver tarnishes easily. If we go back to the sun, which we saw before, does gold tarnish? No. You may have dross, which has to be burned off when you're smelting the ore to find the pure ore, but after that, it does not tarnish. It's resistant to acid and to oxidation. It's always bright and shiny, and that's the nature of the sun. The moon, on the other hand, oxidizes very readily. So the thing about working with our lunar energies or our alchemical silver is we have to work a lot on polishing it because we can get into these dark states with the moon. It can tend towards being passive, negative, fickle, gossipy, submissive, temperamental. So those are the dross associated with the moon. These are the things, if this is dominant in your chart or powerful and discordant, these are qualities that you have to work on in terms of your spiritual growth and development. For us in the Hermetic system, astrology is useful as much as it moves us towards that spiritual growth and personal development. On the other hand, the pure metal of silver is when we cultivate harmonious moods. One of the most important aspects is the caring for other life forms, nurturing the dependent or less fortunate. Sometimes this is just, watering your plants, might be all you can muster. And you can do things such as contributing to a food bank as a way of nurturing those less fortunate. The planet Mercury, I wanted to go back to the moon for a second. One of the other uses for silver, colloidal silver, it's used a lot now. I remember when I was a child, I think it was silver nitrite was dropped into the eyes of babies as they were born so that there would be no chance of getting venereal disease as they came down the birth canal. But colloidal silver is oftentimes used in nose sprays and in treatments for skin and other such things because of its healing capacity. And I know silver is used also a lot in Ayurvedic medicine. So it has certain antiseptic qualities to it, and I compare that to the nurturing side of the moon. There's nothing as healing as having your puppy crawl up next to you or your mom bring you a bowl of soup or saltines and ginger ale, whatever the remedy may have been. So the planet Mercury governs in the soul what are described as the intellectual urges. This is the process of thought, intelligence, perception, communication. We consider the positive traits of Mercury to be expression. Thing you don't want to do with a personal friend or family member if Mercury is their dominant planet is to tell them to shut up.
I should say.
Yeah. You never.
Not a good idea.
No. Now, the negative traits of Mercury are nervousness. Mercury people can be very excitable. And what happens to us when we're around people who are highly nervous? They make us nervous too. A highly strung nervous system has an impact on everyone around it. Mercury is also considered neutral or convertible, not containing any innate conditioning energy, neither harmony or discord. Now, where Mercury falls in your chart, I want you all to think about this right now, is where Mercury is in your chart, that area, that house is subject to a whole lot of thought. This is an area of your life where you place a lot of analysis or where you may have preoccupations. So positively, the ores of Mercury correspond to intelligence, perception, communication, reflection is important. Think of it. The metal mercury used to be used to coat the backs of glass to create mirrors. I think some of the largest reflecting lenses and telescopes was made from mercury glass. Mercury can be both analytical and or its opposite polarity, which is critical. But in all things it is evaluating and seeks reason and logic in everything. Mercury, however, well, the ores of Mercury seek intelligence through perception and analysis. They are easily corrupted, however, through fanatical thinking and jumping to conclusions. Think about Mercury as a metal. It's actually considered to be highly toxic. And when I was a child, you used to be able to go buy mercury. Can't do that anymore. It's now one of those controlled substances. As a kid, you used to be able to get a vial of mercury.
What'd you do with it?
Roll it around the table.
Yeah, you could roll it around the table. Mercury will take on the shape, much like the mind, it'll take on the shape of any container you put it in. It's reflective. You can drop it through things such as cloth or chamois. It'll break up into hundreds of globules, and when it passes through, come back together again. Mercury is unique among the metals in that at room temperature it's liquid state, but it can also be brought to gaseous or solid state. Much like the mind, it not only takes on whatever container it's placed in the nurture versus nature concept of things. But again, a highly fanatical or incensed mind is toxic. We've all either been that person or known that person.
And Mercury makes people crazy too, isn't it?
The Mad Hatter's disease, yeah, because mercury was used a lot in the process of fulling, which is beating felt into cloth. So, the dross of Mercury, poor communication skills. I hate it when I do this, but yes, there are errors in calculation. Nervousness, I can relate to that one. Anxiety, neuroses, mental ruminations, forgetfulness. My God, I do think there is a pharmaceutical for all of this. But it also comes with what are the list of side effects? Will cause blindness, nausea, diarrhea, hemorrhoids, upset stomach, and backache. All right, to cultivate the pure ores of Mercury, here's an essential lesson, especially for anyone that might possibly have Mercury in Sagittarius, or one of its other detriments. The concept of thinking before you speak. Or taking time to critique, evaluate, and analyze. Positive Mercury is being able to express yourself articulately and succinctly. On to copper, one of the most beautiful of the metals. This corresponds in alchemical language to the planet Venus. In the soul, she governs what are called the social urges, and those are the urges that all of us have to be around other people. This is whether it's in the form of mating and companionship, or in social groups, or friendships, or familial groups. And her most positive traits, the ores of copper, are affection. You'll know people, Venus people, when you're around them. They're very touchy-feely, or they want to hug you when you come through the door, and there's a warmth that's generated by them. However, they also have a negative trait, pliancy.
Which is what?
Can't say no.
Wishy-washy.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all good synonyms. Yeah, to be wishy-washy to go with the crowd, peer pressure. Pliant is something that is malleable and bendable. You know, do you want Thai food or Italian? Oh, whatever you want. But Venus is known as the lesser benefic, and this was attributed to her, I think, by Manlius in the 1st century. He coined the language of the benefics and the malefics. So, wherever Venus falls in our chart, this is an area of our life where we get gratuities. What are gratuities? You leave them at the restaurant. They're tips, they're gifts, they're little generous things that come to us. But the area in which we have Venus is also the area of our life where we have pleasure, beauty, and friendship. So, the ores of copper correspond to our experiences with love. Another form of love is compassion and empathy. Affection in its form between friends. Conjugality, the affection between lovers. Venus also brings sensuality, the love of pleasure itself. Mirthfulness, refinement, beauty are all the ores of copper. And these are essential to have in our life because she is the lesser benefic. The ores of copper bring us a certain degree of harmony, which is why in an astrological chart, with Venus as the lesser benefic, we associate 1/4 harmony with her. And she has a love of luxury. However, you can see from this image that Venus can oxidize easily. The verdigris of Venus is also highly toxic. It's used in paints. It's used both in the garden for insect and or the control of mold. And it's also used in painting the hulls of ships to prevent barnacles from attaching to them. So the dross of Venus can be those times in our life where we have the experience of feeling unloved. My mom actually had a song for that when we were children, which was, "Nobody loves me, everybody hates me, go into the garden to eat worms, big one, small one." When we were experiencing the dross of Venus, that was the anthem which accompanied it. There are times in all of our lives where we may go through periods where there's actually a lack of companionship or friendship. This is the dross of Venus. Or that other, hideous quality, which is jealousy. The inability to say no. In fact, there are certain realm of diseases named after Venus. In her honor, they're called venereal. Venus and the dross of copper can represent the disease to please. And it can, to some degree, though we think of this more as the upper octave of Venus, Neptune, but it does to some degree represent our addictions. Those sensual things in life that we have cravings for. Venus can express as over sensuality. You just can't get enough. So the pure metal of copper is the giving of affection and unconditional love. Persons that have Venus harmonious tend to have ease in functioning in their relationships and friendships. And these are also people who tend to create beauty and comfort in their environment. After Venus comes Mars, whose urges we describe as being aggressive. Mars has the ability either to build up, we consider the best quality initiative, or to tear down. Mars is either constructive or destructive. So initiative and or the experience of harshness are the two polarities of Mars. Manlius assigned to Mars the position of being a minor malefic. That means the small bad guy. So in astrology, we assign 1/4 discord to Mars whenever he's engaged in an aspect with another planet. And the house position, which is occupied by Mars, if you think about this, this is going to be an area of your life that is quite possibly subject to strife, antagonism, and or effort, and on the positive side, constructive action. This is going to be an area of life where you assert yourself. So, we express the alchemical ores of iron whenever we utilize our initiative, whenever we're constructive, whenever we experience passion or desire for something. It can also be lust, anger, strife, destruction, and aggression, which are all the more negative traits of this planet. But that power can also be used in defense, both self-defense and or defense of the weak or helpless, standing up for the underdog. The ores of iron find expression through building up or tearing down. Iron can be used for either tools or weapons. Just as iron easily rusts, the ores of iron tend to easily incite lust and anger. There you have it. Rust. So, here are some of the dross of iron. Anger, aggression, impulsiveness, violence, strife, rage, fury, resentment, antagonism, hostility, destructiveness, lust, bloodlust, and desire. How are you feeling now?
Lusty.
Oh. When we develop the positive ores of iron, whenever we express constructive behavior towards the protection of the weak or helpless, and whenever we decide in a situation to build up rather than tear down. It only works in my right hand. Astrological 10 corresponds to the brilliant Jupiter. Big, buoyant, optimistic. The thing about 10, if you can think back a couple of centuries, Napoleonic era, 10 was used. We still call things tin cans. Mm-hmm. Was used in the canning process because it resisted acids. Now I think they're made from stainless steel, but tin was used in lining pots and cans. So the best trait of Jupiter is its benevolence, and the worst trait can be conceit. The major benefic Jupiter brings 1/2 harmony. And, if you think about it, the area of your chart where Jupiter is found is subject to abundance, opportunities, goodwill. This is where we tend to have what we describe as luck. Good things coming to us with a relative amount of ease. So, Jupiter can bring in experiences with affluence, charity, generosity, luck, which we've described, gain that comes to us with little effort, the opportunities we have in life, our experiences with faith, a belief in a higher power, and our optimism. These are items made from tin. The ores of tin find expression through reliance on a higher power, faith, and benevolence. Their tendency is to function ethically and take the moral high ground. Tin gives generously and in return receives the goodwill of others. Optimism and seeing the silver lining to every cloud are natural expressions of tin. Now, even Jupiter has its downside. Here you can see tin as it's going through its own stages of decay. What's interesting is what tends to cause tin to disintegrate is cold temperatures. You know, it's such a warm and effervescent planet that the absence of warmth causes it to fall apart. So these are coins that were placed in liquid nitrogen. That's what happens. All right, conceit, a holier-than-thou attitude, religious fanaticism, excessive generosity, naivete, a laissez-faire attitude, or gluttony are all negative expressions of tin. This is all the dross of tin. However, the pure metal of tin expresses as affluence, charity, generosity, luck, compassion, devotion, reliance on a higher power. I use the Dalai Lama here. Meg brought him up earlier. If you ever watch him, what's he always doing? He's giggling like a little kid all the time. Yeah, he's very funny and he expresses goodwill towards all people, all life forms. All right, we're moving towards the densest and heaviest of the metals. Lead, which has influence over those drives in our subconscious that could be described as safety. At this time of year, depending on where you live, you can see squirrels ferreting away nuts and other things for the winter. Ants may be collecting seeds, carrying them underground. Bees collect honey for a period of time where there is not fluorescence in the world for them to draw pollen from. So the safety urges, the ability to plan for the future, is actually essential within our soul. Why? Our survival alone depends upon that. Mormons, I think, are the epitome of these safety urges. Why? They have 10 years of food stashed away. In New Orleans, after the hurricane hit, what's the FEMA? You know, not a great responder. Who came through at that time? The Mormons. They were organized, and they had all of their storehouses ready to open up. So that's just using an example of a part of a specific group that has a strong and constructive Saturn. Saturn is the major malefic, being responsible for 1/2 discord in a chart. And where Saturn falls in your chart, we see Saturn as bringing restrictions or poverty. So this is an area oftentimes where we have losses or confinement, or where we tend to have heavy responsibilities. So the dross of Saturn in our lives are when we suffer through periods of prolonged hardship. Has anyone had that? Yeah. We all have a little bit of everything. Where you may experience illness or physical disabilities, periods in your life where you have grinding duties or heavy responsibilities, when you experience losses, poverty, sorrows, grief, depression, selfishness, and greed.
What's the difference between the dross and the ores?
Well, the ore,
Some of the same words.
the ore is, we can compare the ore of any planet to the experiences of life. In life, if you have experiences with self-esteem, let's say you receive a trophy or an award, or you may be chastised publicly. Those are all the ores of the sun, of gold. The dross is the chastisement. The pure ore is when you're able to take that experience and extract from it. Is anyone in here less than perfect? I know, I hate to admit it. Yeah, me. Well, humility is a positive side to the ores of gold, and it can actually be the pure metal of gold. Is, you know, if someone has chastisement, rather than standing up and fighting and saying, you know, it's not my fault, blah, 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 sometimes it's okay to just, yeah, you know what? I made a mistake, next time I'll do better. So that becomes, you can take any experience and turn it into pure ore, depending on what the attitude is that you hold to the experience. And the experiences are the reverberatory furnace. Life puts us through the furnace. And when we go through any of these experiences with intensity, the molecules start moving faster, and these are the times in our life where we have opportunities to build qualities into our soul. Now, the pure metal of lead is when we work with planning, preparation, foresight, prescience, organization, safety, our systems, our structure, our methods, when we take on responsibility and duty and accountability, and when we go through life functioning with conscientiousness. So these are all ways in which we can build positive lead. Now lead...
It was 30 seconds.
All right, 30 seconds to replace the tape. Conscientiousness. But back to lead. Lead is like mercury now. It's a, what would they call it? It's like a protected material. They don't just let it out anywhere because of its toxic nature. Lead is heavy, it is morose, it's dull, and usually the experiences of Saturn are much like that in our life. They are the heavies in our life. Now that we have the three upper octaves, which I'm just going to stream through here, Uranus governs the individualistic urges in the soul. This is the need to be unique and different. If Uranus is the most powerful planet in your chart, there's a good chance you suffer from terminal uniqueness. Which can express either as originality, you know, being full of brilliant ideas all the time, or you may just be a tad bit eccentric and have trouble fitting in anywhere. This is also a neutral planet, meaning that the aspects received by it or its relationship to either malefics or benefics in a chart, or the sign in which it falls, adds conditioning energy. Now, where Uranus falls in your chart, you can be guaranteed that that's an area of your life that is subject to sudden change. This is where you may have erratic behavior, novelty, or invention. Or you may just attract erratic people through that area. Now, in Hermetic astrology, Church of Light astrology, Uranus is considered the upper octave of Mercury. So we corresponded in our alchemical process to the ores of quicksilver. As I mentioned earlier, Uranus reflects Mercury. Only Mercury functions on the level of logic and reasoning and analysis and critical thinking. Uranus bypasses the addition, the multiplication, the division, and it gets things like that. Uranus functions through inspiration, through intuition, where the answer to something floods your consciousness. And this is something that inventors oftentimes experience, whether it's through dreams or just through, flashes of inspiration. The idea comes to them. We see this in creative artists and the occasional nutcase. All right. We'll talk about antidotes later, but it's listed here. The antidote is 10. Neptune, upper octave of Venus. As I described earlier, Venus is love and conjugal love. Neptune is love extended out to all of life. It's a mystical love. And the urges of Neptune are utopian. Neptune dreams of a better world and creating a better world. And unless we have dreamers, it never happens. So we actually need to have visionaries in the world. Otherwise, the world just never gets better. They don't usually fare well at the hands of the masses. And the negative trait of Neptune is vagueness. And this is, if you're ever around anyone with a dominant Neptune, you might find that they have trouble getting their ideas out. You want to give them a fork to pry the words out of their mouth, because it's coming through. It may be clear in their vision, but they're not always executing it. They're not always articulating what's going on. Though Neptune also is neutral, and therefore the nature of the aspect and the planets involved in the aspect add conditioning. Think about where Neptune falls in your chart, because this is going to be an area of your life where I always say you need to take a reality check. This is where you have your biggest illusions. It's subject to fantasy thinking, but it's also where your intuition may be active. So copper is the metal we associate with Neptune, and the antidote is lead. What's the best antidote to fantasy thinking? Harsh reality. It'll get you every time.
Or a good plan.
Yeah, very good plan. Thank you. Pluto governs in the soul the universal welfare urges. And this is the desire to be connected to something greater than yourself. Persons who have Pluto prominent are very drawn to groups and organizations. The need to participate, the need to find community, the need to figure out their role in the cosmic plan, what their life mission is driving for them. And although Pluto is neutral, it is extreme. And the positive traits of Pluto can be cooperation. If you think about it, Pluto is happiest when it's like the choir. Everyone's singing off the same sheet of music. We're all working together for the same goal. But the worst traits of Pluto are coercion or manipulation, conformity. Pluto desires conformity. The Japanese, who are strongly a conformist society, actually have a saying: the nail which sticks up must be beaten down. Yeah, you don't want to catch your tabi on it as you're moving across the floor. So you'll see this. What happens within groups quite often? There's great pressure to conform. The extreme of that is cults of any kind, where individual thinking is not encouraged. So, upper octave of the moon, as I described it earlier, the need for family is extended towards embracing the universe, finding community, reaching out to society, whether it's in a neighborhood association, your local, political affiliation, etc. Now, the antidote for silver is iron. If you think about it, the negative traits of the moon have to do with passivity, and iron adds initiative. Get up and change the light bulb. You don't have to sit there in the dark. With Pluto, we have to be a little careful when we apply iron to the alchemical silver of Pluto, because mixing aggression with coercion is a really lethal combination. With the upper octaves, Zane always recommends that in addition to the antidote, that the sun is applied. Thought cells tied in with alchemical gold, which always has to do with vitality, self-esteem, finding a sense of authority. Because the upper octaves do have a tendency to express a more negative polarity, or more passive rather than an active force. This is from Democritus, 5th century BC. Just as tragedy and comedy can be written using the same letters, so many varied events in this world can be realized by the same atoms, as long as they take up different positions and describe different movements. This relates directly to alchemy. We're working with the same atoms, whether it's lead, tin, iron, copper, mercury, silver, or gold. But they draw in different types of experiences for us, depending on their placement in our charts and the type of conditioning energy they have. Separating pure metal from dross. Our aim as alchemists is to continually work on ourselves so that we experience a greater sense of internal integrity and consistency and harmony. Here's a quote from Spiritual Alchemy. This reverberatory furnace of the spiritual alchemist is fed by an outpouring of love. Nothing raises the vibrations as quickly as love. It is the love of oxygen of the air for the carbon in the fuel that gives the material furnace its intensity. Love operates on various planes, but only unselfish love affects spiritual substance. Now, in alchemy, there are two processes. Now we get to move closer to the practical application of this. We have transmutation and we have conversion of metals. What does it mean to transmute something?
Change to form.
Very good. It's basically to change something into another nature, substance, form, or condition. In alchemy, transforming base metals into gold, transmutation is achieved by two processes, as I described. It's either conversion or antidotes. That's the way we work on ourselves, or we change ourselves. To convert something, similar to transmutation, this comes to us from the Latin conversio, which means a complete change. Changing something in character, form, or function. In alchemy, conversion involves reconditioning the feelings associated with the problem metal to express only harmoniously. I'm going to give you an example of that. Let's say the trouble metal for you is lead. What are going to be some of the problems associated with that?
Poverty.
Yeah, poverty is a big one. Lack, deficiency, which are all a form of poverty.
Greed.
And or it could be greed or selfishness,
Depression.
which generally accompanies poverty, lack, deficiency. And greed or selfishness will bring it on too. Why? Whenever we're thinking about what we don't have, we're generally unhappy. Just try it for a moment. Think about what's missing in your life. So, when we go to convert the metals, and there are different ways of working on ourselves, we decide to only allow the positive expression of that metal. And positive Saturn expressions?
Careful
System, planning, organization,
Study.
foresight, prescience, study, and taking on responsibilities and duty. So we work on just that side, and we continually use a type of mental vigilance to discover when, the greed signal or selfishness signal or the lack thought is coming up.
So would that be like thinking of all the good things you do have, as opposed to thinking of all the things you lack?
Exactly. Looking at your strengths in terms of duty, responsibility, structure, and having a plan. Hold on, repeat the question. The question was, therefore, thinking about the things that you do have rather than what you lack. So that's basically it. You look at what is present rather than what's missing.
Do you have to take action though?
Action is helpful. There's different ways that one works with alchemy. One can do mental alchemy, which is just reconditioning one's thought cells, which we're going to talk about shortly. And one can do physical alchemy, which is the sense of moving into action on things, figuring out physical remedies of what you can do. Basically, we're looking at thoughts, feelings, and activities in our life that bring us pain, and wanting to switch them into activities that bring us pleasure. And so definitely acting on things is one of the ways where you start to reinforce what you're doing into all of your cells rather than just having it be a mental process. Yeah. So it doesn't just have to be an inner process. So an antidote comes to us from the Latin antidotum, and it basically means to give as a remedy against something. So when we think of antidotes, they are different than the core substance that has created the problem. A conversion is almost more like homeopathic medicine, if you think about it. If any of you are familiar with that medical form, it uses very small dosage of the same materia medica that can bring on a condition, such as for migraines, belladonna, deadly nightshade. That's taken in such small doses that the body starts to build up its inner defenses. But an antidote is something that's completely opposite or unlike the poison itself that is used to counteract it. And this is part of the problem, or the problem's not probably the right word, but part of the process as alchemists that we go through, which is determining whether we're going to use conversion or antidotes. So an antidote is something that prevents or counteracts injurious or unwanted effects. In alchemy, antidotes are metals, or we could call them thought cells. We'll talk about this concept shortly, which energetically combine to correct or recondition discordant energies. This comes through utilizing disparate but compatible elements. Let's talk about what they are. Disparate but compatible. The pairings of antidotes are lead and copper. Basically, Saturn is the antidote to Venus. Venus is the antidote to Saturn. What happens if your life is too dreary, too serious, too depressing? What do you need? Well, you need to learn how to have a good time. Dang it. Or what if your life is too licentious and too overly sensual, and you can't say no to anyone, and you have no boundaries?
Boundaries and structure.
You need boundaries and structure. You need some system in your life. You need to stick to some regimen, which is what the metal of lead gives us. So these are two natural antidotes. Tin and mercury. If you think about mercury, what does mercury want to do? It wants to solve everything. Guess what? Sometimes our finite minds are not capable of coming up with all the answers. And at those moments around 3 a.m. when you're lying in bed, mulling over your problems, you need an antidote. And Jupiter is the antidote, which is faith, or reliance on a higher power, having some inward belief that there is a benefic deity that actually has your best interest in mind, and that things will actually work out regardless about how much you think about them. So that Jupiter antidotes Mercury, but there are people that have the opposite. We've all met people who just say, oh, God will take care of it. You know, it'll all be all right. As they're filing for bankruptcy and losing their house and their cars being repossessed. And so what's the antidote to that? There are times, yes, where we have to think about our problems. Generally, it's not 3 a.m. when you can't get on the phone and get someone that can do something about it. So that may be when you get out your prayer beads and start, working on your mantra or whatever it is that tunes you into that higher source. And when you're being overly optimistic, oh yeah, I'll co-sign on their loan because they're good people and nothing bad will ever happen to me. You might actually have to get in there and look at the facts or run a credit report and figure out why they weren't able to get a loan on their own and what the ramifications might be to you if they default on it. So these two particular pairings are very disparate from one another, but they're very compatible to one another. They complement each other. Iron and silver are complementary, and we discussed this briefly before, which is the negative traits of silver or the moon. Moodiness, passivity. Well, the antidote, if you think of Mars in its constructive sense, don't go beat someone up. But you can take action in your life when you're being overwhelmed by moods or feeling passive to the conditions in your life. Mars is taking constructive action. And likewise, what are the negative traits of Mars? Harshness. Mars actually really does want to beat someone up. And if you disagree with them, the fight is on. So what the Mars person has to learn is how to temper that. So that if they're going to be quick to fight, that it's for the defense of someone that is helpless. You know, go fight for defensive little puppies or children or elders that are being abused. You know, find a worthy cause that you can put that energy behind. Yes?
How would you apply that harshness towards self? Would that be the same principle like...
Yes, of taking initiative. The question was, how would you apply that harshness towards yourself? And so the antidote, in case I'm actually understanding your question, I just thought for a moment I might not be. On oneself, let's say you have, you know, self-loathing and anger. You know, every once in a while we'll get into one of those moods. And what you can do is find something domestic. This is the moon. Have any of you decided to clean house when you were really pissed off about something?
Yeah. Always.
Did it work for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Moving into domesticity, which is a lunar quality, oftentimes can help temper our rage. And we actually feel like we're able to do something about our life by putting it into order. Self-nurturance, I think, is very important for persons that have a tendency to pick on themselves. You know, that kind of biting antagonism, teasing that we have towards others, sometimes that becomes turned inward and we have those conversations with ourselves. And one has to switch to attitudes of self-nurturance, just as you might water your plants, hopefully before they start drooping and turning brown. You'd have to do that to yourself. Gold has no antidote. In a sense, gold becomes the touchstone to all the other metals. We have to apply a little bit of gold to each of the other metals to transmute it. So all we can do with the power urges in our life is learn how to convert them, since there is no antidote. How to turn condescension into respect of others, defeatist attitudes into accomplishment. The best way to cultivate the ores of gold are to find an area in your life where you're an authority, and then to set about sharing that with others in a non-officious dictative fashion.
Share your authority with others?
Think of it, what's an area of your life that you may feel you're more knowledgeable in than your next door neighbor?
Tarot. I teach it here, so
Okay.
yeah.
Well, doing that, coming here and teaching a subject in which you're an authority, is the way to convert that energy. And what it does is it brings in the subtle qualities of self-esteem and self-worth.
Christopher, going back to the nurturing aspects of, you know, taking care of ourselves when we're picking at ourselves. I don't remember what program it was, but I heard of this technique where if you take a picture of yourself as a child and put it on your vanity and remember yourself as that child and think of yourself as the parent of that child, because the child still is inside of you and it still lives. And so rather than picking at that child and spanking it or setting it off. And it's
saying
parent.
harsh words.
Yeah,
It's-
saying harsh words. You're being a nurturing parent towards that person.
No, that's an excellent process, which is to have a picture of yourself and decide how you're going to nurture that baby. Because who knows better what that baby needs than you? Because you certainly know what that baby's been deprived of in their life. And you know what's worked well for them. I'm going to get my water because I'm getting a dry mouth. Plotinus? I love this. The thoughts of the soul are not ideas, but creative powers. The more the soul lives in the light of the spirit, turned towards that which is above itself, the more creative it becomes. All right, this did not come out well in your notes. It just looks like a big dark circle. Nevertheless, this is from a book called Imponderable Forces. And in it, CZ's saying, comes up with averages. Basically, he's saying, okay, if you're going to break up the time in your life that you spend in study or focus or working on yourself, these are his recommended measurements. That we give 1/2 of our time to understanding the impact of our own thoughts on our experiences. This is the pie. This much is dedicated to that process. He says 1/4 of the time, which is here, and I think I've got a pointer I can use. 1/4 of your time should be subjected to learning about astrological influences, not only your natal chart and its conditioning, but your progressions and upcoming aspects and the type of influences that will be attracted into your life at any given time. Here, we have environmental influences, which he says is worth 1/8 of your time understanding. Who can give me some environmental influences?
Where you grew up.
It could be where you grew up.
Sure.
It could be whether you have radon seeping up through your floor. That's certainly in your environment. It could be whether the house is painted pink or green. That's an environmental influence. Any other ideas?
Weather.
How about the people you surround yourself?
The friends one keeps, the community that you live in. I remember one member of our organization who about 20 years ago moved to somewhere in Kansas and really felt that she had trouble following her faith and being able to express it publicly and openly with others. Because in this particular community where the zip code begins with 666, they all thought she was doing the work of the devil. So sometimes our environment has an impact on us. As to whether or not it provides opportunities. The thoughts of others. Oops, wrong button. Back. Forward. I'm learning this thing. This little piece of the pie, 1/16. The thoughts of others. Now there are times where there are extremes. I'm one of those people that's very sensitive to the thoughts of others and vice versa. I may think about a client I haven't seen or heard from in 9 years, and within 3 days they may call. And oftentimes what it is a few days before they've come across an old tape, been listening to it, thinking about me, and I call them free floaters. It's like, oh, remember so-and-so? And it just floats across the consciousness, and within a few days there's that call that comes in. So I'm obviously sensitive to the thoughts of others. People that I spend a lot of time with, companion or sister, will oftentimes say the same things at the same time. And it's just, in my particular world, that's a bigger piece of pie. But Zane says, you might as well give this about 1/16 of your time. There are extremes. I remember some 30 years ago reading a case history of a woman put into a mental institution, believing she was crazy, and her husband believed she was crazy. The day he died in the outside world, unbeknownst to her, she snapped out of it and became a normal person again. So everyone who's been in a relationship knows that you're either feeding, nectar or poison into your partner at different times of the day, depending on what you're thinking about them. And if you're really in tune with them, you can feel when they're feeding it to you, whether it's in the same room or at a distance. So the thoughts of others do have an impact on us. Oh, this is the one. Unseen entities. Now, Zane didn't think that was worth half of the pie, but if you were in a spiritualist community, that might be given a bigger piece of the pie, where the belief is that the unseen world has a greater impact. This is not only those who have died and passed over that still continue to impact us, but interplane guides, mentors, angelic forces, genies, elementals, whatever. These are all unseen forms of consciousness that can have an impact on our life. And there are certain people who have greater degrees of sensitivity that respond to that. And what the heck is an imponderable force?
An immeasurable one.
Yeah. I mean, everything else falls into imponderable forces. There are those things out there that we just ponder and don't get the answers for, that do have an impact on us. So, why am I doing this? Well, the reason for that is 3/4 of this pie that we're having, and we should probably stop and break for the pie, speaking of but 3/4 of this pie are tied in with understanding astrological influences, but also understanding the impact of our own thinking. So that's what we're going to get to next in tonight's class. For those of you who are watching us over the internet, this is your time for a break. We're actually going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to get up, move around, have some refreshment. Do we have pie in the kitchen we can serve? Or?
Indeed.